What's going on YouTube? It's Braxtech again, and today I have two Legion devices that I will be doing a comparison with. I have the 2022 model here on the right, which is running a 12900HX and an RTX 3080 Ti, and I have the 2023 model on the left here, which is running Intel's 13th gen 13900HX, which is the third highest bin available behind the 13950 and 13980HX, and it's running NVIDIA's RTX 4080 12GB, which is allowed to run up to a maximum TGP of 175 watts after dynamic boost. This came configured with 32 gigs of DDR5 5600 megahertz RAM, and that's running at JEDEC 46CL, I believe. 1 terabyte 980 Pro OEM drive, it's like a PM991 or something like that. And a 240 hertz QHD 500 nit display. It's IPS, still running the same resolution, just a little bit brighter and a little bit faster. Same sort of color coverage and everything like that compared to last year. It's just a bit quicker in terms of refresh rate and response time. This one this year is currently retailing for $27.49 as configured at Lenovo as well as B&H Photo, compared to last year's model, which I believe was $3,400 from B&H, and without coupons it was like $4,000 from Lenovo directly, which it obviously could be had cheaper, but without any coupons those were their respective MSRPs. All right, getting right into it, let's talk about some of the physical changes that Lenovo has made between these two chassis. So the 2022 model definitely has a more premium look when comparing the two. The edges are like polished aluminum and they're chamfered. The rear exhaust vents are definitely a little bit more polished and premium looking. The keyboard deck is aluminum still, the trackpad is glass, and there's a fingerprint sensor in the power button. This year, the rear vents are now plastic, unfortunately, and they have a, I guess you can consider it more polarizing design, probably more gamery, less elegant. The top and bottom panels are still aluminum, but from what I can tell, this part, the palm rest and keyboard deck are now plastic, though they're very sturdy, and they did remove the fingerprint sensor from the power button. All pretty unfortunate changes, but when you look at it from far away or at a high level, they look very, very similar, and I'm actually a little bit more partial to the darker color on the 2023 model. Going into ports, so the main differences are going to be the removal of some Type-C for the inclusion of some Type-A ports. So on the 2022 model, on the left-hand side, there was 2 Thunderbolt 4s. On the right-hand side, there was 1 Thunderbolt 4, or excuse me, just Type-C, and then the rear actually remains unchanged compared to the two models. The 2023 model has the same rear I/O. I believe the RJ45 jack was actually downgraded from 2.5 gig to 1 gig, so that really only matters if you're running fiber at your house. But the left-hand side sacrifices 1 Thunderbolt for a Type-A port, and then the right-hand side also sacrifices a Type-C port for 1 Type-A port. Otherwise, the I/O remains largely unchanged. All right, so comparing the keyboards and palm rests and trackpad. So the 2022 model has the single color for the entire chassis, including the keys themselves. It's this onyx gray color, I think they call it. The trackpad is glass compared to the 2023 model, which I will miss. The key travel leaves a little bit to be desired. I will say I do prefer the keyboard that's found on the 2023 model. It's basically a revised, better per key RGB version of the Legion 5 Pro from 2021 and 2022. It is quite nice, actually. I do enjoy typing on it. Here's a little sound profile for it. Not super loud, not super clicky, but it is tactile, feels good to type on. I really don't have any major complaints for either of them, though I do prefer this one. The trackpad this year is Mylar. I will potentially attempt to swap these because they do have the same dimensions according to their product pages, but that'll come at a later date depending on if I decide to keep this unit or not. I may go up to a 4090 model if I do find a good deal on one. But other than that, they are pretty similar in terms of layout. I can get up to speed pretty comfortably on both of them, and I really don't have any major complaints for either of them other than the travel distance on the 2022 model. All right, moving along, we have both of the bottom panels popped off for both laptops. Again, right-hand side is 2022, left-hand side is 2023. So the layout is very similar, if not identical, outside of a few, I would say, thoughtful changes. Both of them are running 99 watt-hour batteries. That has not changed. That is still the legal limit that you can fly with. Both of them have Gen 4 speed NVMe slots here and here. The RAM sticks, there's 2 DIMM slots on both of them in the same spot, except 2023 supports 5600 megahertz JEDEC spec. The 2022 model runs at 4800 megahertz stock. The main difference is in cooling. So I will bring this up close for you guys to see. So the 2022 model, as you can see here, is running a 3-point mount for the CPU. Now, that is not super impactful when they're running PTM 7950, which is that popular phase change material that now NVIDIA is using on their founders cards. However, the 2023 model is now running factory applied liquid metal. So as you can see, there is a warning sticker here that warns you to say, please be careful when you disassemble this, and customers should not disassemble it. The CPU mount is now running a 4-point mounting system at each corner. Now, this is extremely important for even core deltas and to make sure that you don't overheat or have hot spots on your die, basically. So those 2 changes are extremely meaningful and extremely impactful for CPU-only loads, which I'll get into in a little bit. And the only other major difference in the cooling solution that I can tell is the fan blade design. It looks like they squeezed in some extra blades there that aren't full blades, for lack of a better term. It's supposed to probably increase static pressure to get air through the bottom chamber, bottom panel a little bit better. But other than that, those are the main changes. I don't see anything other than that that's significant. And plus, I'm a big fan of the internal design of both of these. I think there's not a ton of wasted space. They're pretty easy to access. And overall, I think it's a great design from both models. I think the vapor chamber change on the 2023 one is absolutely huge. It's incredible. I love it. And I'll talk to you guys about that in a little bit here. All right, so moving on to performance and benchmarks. The Pro 7i is absolutely terrifying when it comes to performance. This thing is so fast in relationship to the prior gen. I know there's some regressions in terms of design and materials used to build it and some features that are missing, but this thing is incredibly fast. So starting from top to bottom, we have Heaven Superposition run at the 4K optimized preset. There was roughly a 25% increase in score. Cinebench, which is a AVX CPU workload, a 10-minute run. And reminder, all of these benchmarks were run with a plus 150 core and plus 500 memory GPU overclock, as well as a negative 75 millivolt core undervolt for both CPUs. There was a 39% uplift in a 10-minute run of Cinebench R23. Now, that is absolutely absurd to see any laptop scoring over 30,000 in R23, let alone 33,000. And that is a huge generational uplift, almost 40% gen over gen for Intel there. And the cooling solution also has a lot to do with that, which I'll talk about later. Moving on, we have Port Royal, which is showing almost a 44% uplift in ray tracing performance, going from roughly 8,500 on the 3080 Ti to over 12,000 on the 4080. TimeSpy, which is the combined score of CPU and GPU, showed a 34% uplift across CPU and GPU scores combined. And lastly, for Firestrike Extreme, we see a roughly 30% increase. And again, this is combined CPU and GPU scores, which Firestrike is largely rasterized. So we can obviously see it's less of an uplift versus something like Port Royal. And moving forward, also, we have 2 game benchmarks, one being Modern Warfare 2, running at 1440p, the Extreme preset. We saw a 28% increase in frame rate there. And then for Shadow of the Tomb Raider, running at 1440p as well at the highest preset without ray tracing, we see a whopping 43.6% uplift in performance. Now, I don't have more games than that. I just have this benchmark week in these 2, which I think are a great representation of both CPU and GPU demands. This thing is insane. I still cannot get over how fast it is given its price point. And it's also very competitive compared to some of the alternatives, such as the G18 from Asus. And I think really the rest of the 4080 laptops are well over 3,000 at this point. So very impressive from Lenovo. All right, so moving on to dual load stress test, I ran AIDA64 and artificially limited both the CPU and GPU to 75 watts and 150 watts respectively, which I think should be pretty encompassing of most normal gaming loads, not stress tests. I ran them both at max fans, both of which settled in at around the mid 50s decibels. And I measured it about roughly 8 inches away from the laptop, so it should be pretty representative of what it would sound like, and you can compare it to like Notebook Check or any other YouTuber that does sound profiles. Both of them are not nearly the loudest compared to some offerings from like Acer or MSI, such as like the Titan. That thing can go well above 60 decibels, which is insanely loud. The other thing I wanted to preface is that I equipped the 7i Gen 7 with liquid metal to put it on equal footing to the Gen 8 model. I did this to get closer to an apples-to-apples comparison between the two machines. Obviously, PTM is a great thermal interface material, but liquid metal, especially on Intel-based CPUs, tends to do that much better, usually 8 to 12C. So I figured for the purposes of this comparison, I should make them as close as possible to compare apples to apples of the vapor chamber differences and the size differences. So right off the bat, it's very clear that the Gen 8 model has an advantage in CPU temperatures, roughly 7 degrees cooler while maintaining a very similar sound profile at the same power draw. However, on the GPU side, it does run a bit warmer, about 6 degrees warmer, and I think this is largely contributed to the fact that the 4080 like Ada Lovelace die itself is quite a bit smaller, so power density is higher. Pulling the same amount of power, but being in a smaller footprint means it's harder to get that heat out of that silicon. So that's my hypothesis, because there really isn't any major differences in the cold plate or the vapor chamber design for the GPU side in particular. Another thing that I wanted to call out specifically that's new for the Gen 8 model that is significantly better over its predecessor is its even core deltas. So in the Gen 7 2022 model, more often than not, half of your cores would be cresting 95, 96, 97 degrees in thermal throttling, while the other half of your cores would be in the low to mid 80s, which is really frustrating for somebody that's trying to eke out every ounce of performance as they can, because half of their cores would be throttling all of their cores' core clocks. The Gen 8 model, because of its new 4-point mounting solution, does an excellent job of keeping those cores much more tight in terms of core deltas. Outside of cores 1 and 2 for my unit in particular, all of them are within 2 to 3C of each other, which is a significant improvement over the predecessor, which had very, very wide deltas of 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, running similar loads such as Cinebench or other CPU-heavy stress tests. All right, so some closing thoughts on this device. I know there were some compromises versus its predecessor. There's no glass trackpad, yes. There's no fingerprint reader, yes. But you know what? This thing screams in performance. It is significantly faster than its predecessor, and it's significantly cheaper than its predecessor. The target audience for this are not the people that want every single feature that's possible to be on a laptop, right? Windows Hello, Tobii eye tracking, haptic keys that are pressure sensitive. People that are buying this laptop are buying it because it's a reasonable price and it's very, very performant, and it looks pretty good doing it, right? The only way you could tell this is a gaming laptop really is by its rear vents and the RGB. But if you didn't want it to look like that and you want it to look like more of a normal machine, you can set your own keyboard profile. Nice white backlight, no crazy RGB, turn off the front light bar, and this thing looks pretty damn good, and it blends in with any other laptop from Lenovo. In my opinion, I love it. I think the price point that they targeted for this to compete with the G18 from Asus and the M16 from Alienware, they did a great job to make sure that their budget is in check, and they elicited the proper audience for this. I think they left out the features that not a lot of people will care about when buying a performance-centric machine, and I think I can live with those differences, especially for the price I paid. So I give it a very solid 10 out of 10 for Lenovo. Awesome job, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.